To everyone, he was just a boomer blacksmith from the wilderness. He was thrown out of the guild and forgotten. But one old gift turned into a legend, and the old man himself suddenly became a master, the talk of the capital. But will he be able to stay safe when his enemy becomes his apprentice? Let's find out. This story begins in the glorious city of Righton. A 40-year-old blacksmith, Deret, received a letter from a girl inviting him to the capital. She signed her letter as Militara, and he remembered this funny, mischievous girl. She then asked him to make her a toy weapon. He could not refuse her, and she ran away contentedly, clutching the toy to her chest. He smiled warmly, remembering her, and nostalgia came over him. The thing is, a few weeks ago, he was called to the guildmaster sign-on from the blacksmiths guild. He timidly entered the office. His premonition did not predict anything good for him, and so it turned out as he feared. The leader told him that there was no benefit from him working in his guild. He did not justify himself. Deret asked him to explain to him better what the matter was. Sign-on continued that the problem was the terrible price-quality ratio, so he was firing him. And now he had a lot of other things to do, so he could get out of here. The dejected blacksmith wandered home, and the manager watched him go and said good riddance. Deret was given a ride home by a girl and a child in a cart, and while they were driving, the man fixed the boy's toy horse. Having reached his home, the protagonist gave the boy his toy, saying that he fixed it. The child thanked him, calling him Grandpa, and MC jumped off the cart and waved his hand after them. He thought about it. After all, he had dedicated 30 years to blacksmithing, and now he was quite an old man. Deret remembered the girl's letter. Without thinking twice, he got ready and went to the capital. The capital greeted him with its noise and a crowd of people. He thought that there were more people here than before. Come to think of it, he hadn't really left Righton, so being fired was a good excuse for him to come here. The protagonist realized that he was very hungry, so he decided to have a snack. He approached a woman who was selling food and asked her what she could recommend him. She asked him in return if he would like a kebab from a wild boar cow. He agreed, paid her, and thanked her. He stood not far from her and began to eat his delicious kebab. The woman told him that she hadn't seen him here before. Perhaps he came from somewhere? He told her that he came from Righton City. MC also told her that he used to work at the blacksmith's guild, but he was fired. Suddenly, loud voices were heard near the weapon shop. A female voice was scolding someone, like, does he even understand how much this falchion costs? This sword couldn't even cut an ent branch. A male voice answered that she simply didn't know how to use it. The people who were listening to the argument began to discuss that this shop didn't have a very good reputation. The blacksmith became interested in this argument and decided to go and see what had happened. He received advice from the merchant to be careful. Deret somehow squeezed through the crowd of people closer to the source of the argument. He saw how the girl was holding a broken sword and scolding the seller. She said that this sword made of steel should be able to handle a monster plant. She asked the merchant, so he sold her a fake, right? The merchant smiled nastily and told her that she had no proof. The blacksmith was experienced with steel. He immediately saw that the girl's broken sword was indeed a fake. He stepped forward to address the merchant. He told him that it was not good to lie. He was also a blacksmith, and he could see that this falchion was definitely not made of steel. This sword was made of simple tin. The seller began to be indignant, saying that nothing of the sort was true, that it was slander. But Deret took the broken sword from the girl and told the merchant that everything was visible on the blade itself. The ripples were clearly visible on it. If there had been steel inside, the trace would have been straight. The crowd began to talk. Someone said that a blacksmith they knew had told something similar. Someone said that the old man had spoken the truth. Someone shouted that he would call the guard. The merchant got angry at MC, and he told him that only a pathetic blacksmith fools people and takes advantage of others' ignorance. He should be a blacksmith who takes responsibility. The merchant got even angrier. He shouted at the protagonist not to dare preach to him. He grabbed the sword and rushed at MC. The protagonist only managed to cover the customer with his body, fearing that the merchant could harm her too. Suddenly, a girl in armor appeared in front of the enraged merchant, and she stopped him with her shout. She ordered her squad to tie him up and take him away from here. The customer said that this girl was the commander of the soldiers, and her son thanked the savior. The protagonist was surprised by all this and approached her. He thanked her because he was saved thanks to her. She answered him that this was her work. She looked at him more closely, as if trying to recognize him. He thought, like, does it look like he is unemployed, or is he about to be arrested for being a suspicious old man? She asked him, is he by any chance a teacher? The girl smiled widely at MC and introduced herself as Militara. Does he still remember her? She continued that 10 years ago, he made her a toy sword. The protagonist was happy to see her. He didn't think they would meet here. He added how she had grown up. She confirmed her assumption that it really was him. The girl asked him if he had received her letter. One of her squad members asked her who it was. Militara explained to the soldier that MC had looked after her when she was very little, and now she intended to chat with him a little. She ordered her soldiers to return first. The protagonist was surprised and asked the girl if she had become a commander. She answered in the affirmative and added that it was all thanks to him. He admired her, because it was an amazing achievement. Militara objected that not at all, it was all thanks to this sword. She pulled out her sword and offered the protagonist to look at it. He took the sword in his hand and realized that in front of him was a pitch-black divine magic sword, Shinma, rank S, element, holy. MC enthusiastically exclaimed that this was the treasure of the country. The girl told him that in fact, he created it. He was even more surprised. How could this be? How could he not remember such a sword? He immediately thought that he seemed to have dementia. Militara asked permission to rephrase what she had said to her. The girl said that this was the sword he had once made for her, and it had evolved. The protagonist was in a state of shock. He had never heard of such a thing. She replied that she hadn't heard of it either, but this sword changed its shape as she grew, and eventually became like this. Most likely the weapon he created can evolve. MC asked in shock, so this sword is a toy from that time? Was it really a toy before? He can't believe it, that such a thing is possible. Militara explained that she called it maturation of feelings. It was her hypothesis. She asked MC if anyone had noticed anything like this in Reeton when he was creating tools. He replied that no, there were more adventurers there, and in that city people often change their things. As a blacksmith, he couldn't reveal himself there because the things he created were thrown away faster than they revealed themselves. She agreed with him, that's how it happened. The girl continued that she called him because she had a request for him. He reminded her that she had written him about it in a letter. MC asked what she wanted. Militara replied that it was simple. Could he become the personal blacksmith of her valiant army? The protagonist was dumbfounded by her request, and he began to decline her offer in confusion. The girl told him with a pleading voice that she begs him not to refuse her. They have no one else to ask. There are circumstances for her asking him to do this. Then the same customer with the child that the blacksmith stood up for came up. The woman apologized for interrupting MC and Militara, but she came to thank the protagonist for his help. She added that she did not even know how to thank him. Her son turned to the girl, addressing her as a commander, and he thanked her too. The girl smiled and told the boy that she saw him at the entrance ceremony, and she was very glad that no one was hurt in today's situation. Then she grabbed Deret by the arm and pulled him along, telling him that they needed to hurry. The woman he saved shouted at him that they would like to thank him, let him look into the inn in the Eastern District. The protagonist replied that he would stop by. He happily muttered that he was making useful connections, and the girl told him not to say anything, or he would bite his tongue. Meanwhile, in the protagonist's hometown, in the blacksmith guild, Sinon admired his reflection in the mirror. He thought how dazzling he was, and smiling to himself, he went out to the workers. He greeted them and asked if they were ready to earn money. He continued that it was time to start their morning meeting, and they would start with their guild philosophy. At that moment, a group of people came to them, and Sinon asked them who they were. In response, one of the young men in this group asked if Mr. Deret was here. The protagonist was sitting in a restaurant with Militara at that time, reading the menu and wondering how expensive everything was here. In Reeton, in the Blacksmiths Guild, the dialogue between the newcomers and the guildmaster continued. The young man repeated his question addressed to Sinon, "Is Mr. Deret here?" He introduced himself as Senji, an envoy from the royal palace. He was looking for the famous blacksmith because he had a request for him. The guildmaster got angry in response. "What Deret are we talking about here? He is the boss here, and the envoy by any chance does not have any requests for him." Senji calmly answered him that he did not. Sinon got even angrier and wanted to attack the envoy, but his guards did not allow him to do so. The guildmaster immediately calmed down and told Senji that the blacksmith was no longer here. He had fired that useless fool. The envoy from the royal palace exclaimed in surprise, "How is that possible? In what sense did he fire him?" Sinon replied that the blacksmith was only draining the guild's resources, and besides, he did not respect him, his boss, at all. And so, he got what he deserved. Senji was very upset that the master was not here. He lamented that the blacksmith, who was valued by the queen herself, was fired. How unfortunate it all turned out for them. At this time, his guard handed him a box and asked him what to do with it now. Sinon saw the box and asked them to give it to him. They answered him that they were asked to give it specifically to Mr. Deret. He ran up to them, snatched the box from them, and to all their indignation, answered them that he was the boss here. And he was clearly much more experienced than this loser of a blacksmith. He quickly opened the box and was amazed. He saw the angel's sword, a Matsurugi, rank S, element, holy, lying in it. He admired the magnificence of this sword and thought that it really was the sword of a real angel. Senji told him that they were supposed to give this sword to the protagonist for repairs. Sinon angrily asked them why MC? The messenger answered that it was because this sword was created by Mr. Deret himself. The guildmaster went berserk with envy and grabbed the young man by the shoulder. He yelled right in his face that a ghoul like the protagonist simply could not have created something like this. The guards freed Senji, pushing the master of the blacksmith guild away from him, and he continued that Amatsurugi is a sword that has evolved. Sinon was shocked by his words and asked him if they took him for an idiot. Senji replied that no, it was true, the sword was broken. That's why the queen immediately ordered the protagonist to be found to fix it. Sinon couldn't listen to this any longer, and grabbed the sword, saying that he would fix it himself right away. To all the envoy's objections that only Deret could do it, he replied that he was the guildmaster, which meant that he was the best blacksmith here. He kicked everyone out of the guild and began to examine the sword. He thought that there was a problem with the blade, so he could simply sharpen it with a whetstone. True, he had never sharpened a sword in his life, but he had seen his workers do it. He was sure that he could handle it, and his observation skills would help him. He began to work, and thought with delight that he was mastering everything at the highest level of a master. At this time, the expelled envoy and his people were standing on the street when suddenly a terrible loud sound was heard from the room. They were seriously worried and rushed to the door, asking Sinon if everything was okay there. He told them that everything was fine, he was working, and they should shut up. In fact, something had gone wrong with him. Because the angel's sword had broken in half. He was panicking and thinking, what would happen now? This was bad, because he had broken the country's treasure. This was a terrible crime. They would execute him, hang him, behead him, drown him, and what should he do now? Then he remembered his Sinon breathing technique and tried to calm down. He needed to think and find a solution. An idea came to his mind that he could simply glue the broken thing back together. After all, if something was broken, you just needed to fasten it together. And he rushed to look for temporary glue. After some time, he left the workshop, thanking the messenger for waiting. The repaired angel sword was shining in his hand. Senji praised him for the quick work. He told him that the guildmaster was immediately visible. He reached out his hand to the sword, wanting to check it, but Sinon pushed his hand away. He told him that an amateur should not touch it, especially since nothing should be done with it for some time. The messenger wanted to be indignant at his refusal, but he himself carefully raised the sword and exclaimed that it was as beautiful as it was. Senji looked closely at the sword and told the guildmaster that the sword was beautiful. Yes, but he still saw roughness on the blade. Sinon was indignant that he was lying, that he did not have any evidence. All he had to do was just put the sword back in the box. He put it back and thought that if they noticed his mistake, then the blame could be shifted onto them. But then the incredible happened. The sword slipped out of the guildmaster's hands and again fell apart into two parts. Everyone was horrified by what happened. Senji stuttered to Sinon, how could this be? He was supposed to fix it. He was sweating from fear and stuttered to the messenger that he was surprised himself. He was absolutely sure that he fixed it. Maybe he confused it with another one? And then he received a powerful blow to the face with the words, "What did he do, idiot?" Sinon screamed, "What are they doing? It hurts him." And Senji lamented that this idiot guildmaster broke the sword. After all, he knew that he couldn't rely on this fool. He turned to Sinon and told him that he was under arrest. The messenger's guards grabbed the would-be master, and he screamed back and began to resist. Meanwhile, Deret finished his story about the dismissal of Militara, who was listening to him. She was outraged. How could they fire such a famous blacksmith as the protagonist? This guildmaster is just an idiot. He showed his level of incompetence beyond measure. She stuck a fork into her dessert in her indignation. And at that moment, the tied-up Sinon was being taken to the queen. He was driving and thinking, how could everything turn out like this for him? No, he has nothing to do with it. Deret is to blame for everything, and he will definitely take revenge on him. Militara brought the protagonist to the Gross Army base and apologized to him for asking him to be their personal blacksmith. MC calmed her down. He added that he would like to hear what is required of him now. The girl wanted to introduce him to their base. She led the protagonist through the courtyard, showed him their forge. MC was amazed at how big the workshop was. They went inside, and a squad of soldiers lined up in front of them. They greeted their commander and asked her who was with her. She proudly introduced them to the one who created her sword. It was Mr. Deret. He told the soldiers that he was glad to meet them, and the soldiers were confused, and for good reason. They could not even imagine that they could meet such a legendary master. One of the soldiers expressed doubt, saying that this old man did not look like the creator of the legendary sword. Maybe their commander was deceiving them? Then Militara asked them where Nana Hikari was now. They answered her that he had worked a little and left. The girl was outraged by this guy's latest prank, and the soldiers made excuses to her. They said that they told him, but he did not listen to them. The protagonist heard who they were talking about, and he wanted to clarify with the girl who she was talking about. She confirmed his guess that she was talking about their current blacksmith Nana Hikari. His family made huge donations to their army, and he is the only son of Duke Felgrund. Considering this guy's unpleasant character, he is not a blacksmith. For now, they can only suppress his eternal discontent. MC thought that such people are everywhere, and the girl noted that Master Duret is on a completely different level. At that moment, the door creaked, and a young guy entered the room. He said that they were, as always, very dirty here. It was Nana Hikari, and the protagonist was amazed at how much this young man looked like the one MC was thinking about. Milita asked the guy where he had been. He carelessly answered that he had gone on a date. One of the blacksmiths asked him about the long sword. The duke's son lazily took out the sword and asked him, "Is this the sword?" The worker wanted to take it, but Nana Hikari threw it, and the worker was unable to catch it. The protagonist watched them and thought that this was no good. This young man does not hide his dangerous character at all. Meanwhile, the offended worker picked up the sword and examined it, and the duke's son asked, "How did he do it perfectly, didn't he?" MC looked at the sword and saw that it was a terrible job. It was as if the sword had not been touched by a finger, and he wanted to ask Militara about it. The worker expressed doubt that the sword had been repaired at all, and Nana Hikari attacked the poor guy, asking him what he didn't like. At this point, the protagonist couldn't stand it any longer. He grabbed the enraged young man by the arm and pushed him away. He told him that if he was a blacksmith, he should fix his work. The duke's son was indignant, saying who was this old man, and let him take his hands off him. The girl suggested that the young man calm down and told him that in front of him was the man who created her legendary sword, a blacksmith from Riton. Nana Hikari was surprised, and the girl continued with irony, saying that he was already a first-class blacksmith, and now there would be a second one with them. The young man suggested that the protagonist show what he could do. He added that they would have a duel of blacksmiths. They would fight with swords that they would make for themselves. Whose sword would break first would be considered the loser. MC accepted his challenge, but the young man put forward two conditions. The first was that they would only use the materials that were here. The second condition was that the protagonist's sword would be used by a newbie, Konfi. MC was shocked when he heard this name. He wondered how long Konfi had been here. He was so small that Duret hadn't even noticed him. He agreed to the boy's conditions, causing Militara to misunderstand him. The duke's son chuckled and set a duel for 5 days. He added that if MC lost, he would return to his village. The protagonist in turn put forward his own condition. If he won, the boy would take his work seriously. Nana Hikari shrugged and thought, what does this old man think of himself? Actually, it's his forge, he's the boss here. He accepted MC's condition and left the forge. Militara apologized to Duret because in the end, she only made the situation worse, but the protagonist reassured her that this was not the case. Then the youngest worker, Konfi, ran up to them and asked them what he should do. After all, he can only take care of the swords for now. MC tried to reassure him too. He told him that everything would be fine, he would make him a sword with which he would not lose. Moreover, not every blacksmith can create a quality weapon from scrap materials. He smiled encouragingly at the girl and the boy, winked at them and asked them to rely on him. He looked around, examining everything that was here, and realized that there were only D-rank materials here. He thought that it was time to get to work, and then Militara entered. She had not seen the master at work for a long time, and asked him for permission to observe how he would work. She received such permission and prepared for her observation. The protagonist began his work and seemed to dissolve in it. He decided that he would create the best sword in this city, and began to create it. The girl watched him work and thought about what a good sound she heard. The protagonist enjoyed working with metal. He thought with delight that he had not held a hammer in his hands for only a few weeks. But still, the blood of a blacksmith boils in him, and he can't do anything about it. He absolutely loves blacksmithing. Finally, when the sword was ready, the protagonist thought that he needed to make it sharper. After all, he was creating the best sword for confit. He used the magic thunderstone to increase the sharpness. While sharpening the weapon, he thought that he could do it. When he finished, the girl was amazed at how fast he did it. He explained to her that when a person works as a blacksmith for 30 years, he begins to work quickly. He examined the product and was amazed at its class. He realized that he had created an S-rank sword. He couldn't believe it because he had planned for a lower rank. But it turned out to be a real treasure. Enthusiastic Militara laughed and joked that it seemed like the master had gone a bit overboard. They went out into the courtyard and addressed everyone present there. The girl announced that Mr. Duret's sword was ready and called Confide to her. Everyone was amazed at the speed of execution, and the boy had already run up to the girl and the protagonist with a question. Is his sword ready? MC answered positively and added that he wanted to give it to him right away. This is his own Thunderer Emperor common sword, rank S, element, holy. He advised Confide to be careful with it because it is very sharp. The boy admired the beauty of the weapon, and Militara told him that the protagonist had made it with all his heart. So let him not let the master down, let these feelings go to waste. She shouted to her army that before she will personally train the boy in combat. The squad supported her in this decision. The girl told Confide that he must be at the training tomorrow. The boy enthusiastically promised her this. Meanwhile, in the Nana Hikari estate, the duke's son was simply beside himself with rage. He angrily thought, how dare this old man do this to him? His hand even turned red from the way the old man pulled him up. He will never forgive him for this. He loudly called the maid and thought that she was very capable, but creepy. When Eigen entered, he showed her his hand and told her that she needed to record the beatings and sue Duret. She refused him this because his hand was in perfect order. She noticed the metal lying on his table and asked him if these were materials. He answered her with an important look that these were S-rank materials. There was full metal, the stone of the thunder god, the scale of the earth dragon, platinum steel, and the stone of eternal flame. He bragged to her that he had taken out the best from his storage. He added that this would allow him to create the best sword that this upstart MC had ever seen, and he threatened to definitely take revenge on him. The day of the boy Confide's training had arrived. Militara told him that it was impossible to make him a master of the sword in 5 days, and they did not know who his opponent would be. But the most important thing was for the sword not to break, and she knew how to achieve this. He would only need to parry the opponent's blows. She asked the boy if he understood everything. Confide answered in the affirmative, and she praised him. They began training. She attacked him, pretending to be an opponent, and he parried her blows. During the attacks, she taught him not to take the blows from the side and block them with the blade. They trained several times until the boy missed a blow and lost. He was very upset, but the girl told him not to let his guard down in battle. Does he want to die because of his carelessness? They repeated several training sessions again. The protagonist thought that she had been pushing him so hard since the first day, and the boy eventually became completely exhausted. He fell to the ground and lay motionless, but still found the strength to thank Militara. She told him in response that they would train with Kamen's sword tomorrow. The girl asked MC to prepare his sword for tomorrow. In the evening, over dinner, the entire squad discussed the boys' training and their commander. They supported Confide, saying that he was doing an amazing job. They joked that for his size, he was doing very well in training. The soldiers added that it was time for him to leave, and the boy left, taking his uneaten dinner with him. The protagonist watched him, and he felt very sorry for his comrades making fun of him so cruelly. He went to see where the boy was and what he was doing now. The protagonist passed by the training ground and saw that Confide was there. He was training with his sword on his own. MC approached him quietly and praised him for his good work. The boy did not hear his steps, so he flinched in surprise. The protagonist asked him why he was training so late. He replied that he did it every day. He wanted to at least catch up with his commander a little. His dream is to become as agile and brave as she is. The protagonist nodded understandingly and said that she was pushing him pretty hard. He was worried about him, so he came to visit him. Confide replied that he was a very kind person. MC assured him that it was just concern. But did the boy mind that he was taking care of him? The boy smiled contentedly and said that he did not mind at all. He expressed his gratitude to him for the beautiful sword he had made for him. He would not let it break. Its sound was like light peals of thunder. All this awakened something in him that he had not known before. Duret was embarrassed by his praise and told him that he had disturbed him, so he would go back. The boy agreed with him and wished him a good night. MC was returning to his place and remembered Confi's delight at the sword. He could not believe that he liked the sword he made so much. And then he asked himself, when was the last time his work made someone so happy? He decided that he should work on Kamen's sword a little more. 4 days later, at the Nana Hikari estate, the duke's son was scolding his blacksmith, Gilmus, why he got a hard A-rank sword and it did not have any element. The worker told him that it was quite difficult to process S-rank materials. In response, the young man got angry, saying that he did not want to know anything about it, and sent the blacksmith away. He did not even pay him for his work. He called his servant, Eigen, and ordered her to call the mercenary Detroit to him. When the big guy came to him, he asked the guy why he called him to him. Nana Hikari explained the whole situation with the protagonist and the duel. He complained to him that he failed to make a rank S sword, to which the giant answered him that the rank is not important, because he will defeat anyone with any sword for him. He took a metal pipe and easily bent it into a ring. The duke's son looked at this action of the brute and calmed down. It became clear to him that he could not lose. It would be even too easy, but even better this way. He asked Eigen not to tell his parents about this. The maid assured him that she would not tell them anything. And finally, the day of the duel came. Nana Hikari, looking at MC, greeted him, calling him an old man. Deret told him that they had not seen each other for 5 days. Nana Hikari praised him for not running away. They headed to the place of the duel, where many spectators had already gathered. When MC and Militara approached, they were surprised. The judge announced that the day of the duel had arrived and called out the names: Lord Nana Hikari versus Lord Deret, a duel of blacksmiths. The spectators were confused. Someone from the crowd exclaimed, "Is this the destroyer of Detroit? Really?" Another voice shouted, "Look at the sword of Konfi." Militara was furious and said that this was an unequal fight. The protagonist, perplexed, agreed with her. Nana Hikari noted that it was immediately obvious that MC's sword was a fake. At this time the rules were announced: whose sword breaks first and whoever goes outside the arena loses. The protagonist noted that these were unfair rules, to which Nana Hikari only laughed. Detroit, hearing this, asked if the small fry was his opponent, and so the fight began. The big guy made the first strike, but missed and hit the ground. A strong wind arose from the strike, and stones flew in all directions. Someone from the spectators exclaimed in surprise, "What power, almost blew me away." The big guy made a second attack and said, "Take that." But Konfi dodged again. Then, the big guy said that he couldn't run forever. He made another attack, which Konfi dodged again. He found himself in the corner of the arena. The big guy laughed at him and said that he had nowhere else to run. Someone expressed the opinion that he couldn't watch this. The big guy asked if he could admit defeat, to which Konfi replied that he was not going to give up. Detroit warned him that he would now regret his decision. Konfi remembered that the commander had trained him, and that Mr. Deret had created the Kamina sword for him. Then the big guy swung his sword and shouted that he dare not die. In response, Konfi confidently said that he would not lose. The swords collided, and suddenly the thug's sword broke, and a fragment flew to the side and stuck in the ground. Someone from the crowd exclaimed, "This can't be." The sword was destroyed. The protagonist thought, he overdid it. Then it was announced that Konfi was the winner. Militara looked at the protagonist with joy and said, "It happened." The protagonist nodded in agreement. Konfi ran up to her and exclaimed, "Commander!" She praised him for his success in return. The thug, immersed in sadness, went to the blacksmith. Nana Hikari stood there in bewilderment, not understanding what had happened. The protagonist approached him and said that Nana Hikari would now take his job seriously, as he had promised. He responded rudely and told him to shut up. He added that he was leaving the army and would sue them. At that moment, the housekeeper slapped Nana Hikari on the back of the head. Everyone was shocked. She apologized for the young master and said that she would have a talk with him to awaken his common sense. The protagonist, the commander, and Konfi stood there in bewilderment as they left. When they returned home, Nana Hikari was shouting that he was a fool and would not forgive this. The big guy wanted to leave the house, but he stopped him and asked what he paid him for. The big guy replied that he was retiring because he lost to a little boy and was too weak. He said goodbye to Nana Hikari and left. He was furious. He called him a useless fool and pointed at the housekeeper, calling her a traitor. She said that she admitted to hitting him and apologized. Nana Hikari told her to do so. As she left the room, she continued talking. She told him that he used S-rank materials and that the destroyer lived in the mansion. She told his parents about this and said goodbye to him. He ran out of the room after her and tried to stop her, saying that she had promised not to tell and he would fire her. At that moment, Nana Hikari screamed. His parents were standing behind him. His father was angry. He was shouting at his son, accusing him of using the materials they were preparing to sell to another country without permission. Nana Hikari's mother, in turn, was furious. She asked her son if he was trying to destroy their family's reputation. He tried to stop them, but did not have time to utter a word. His father said that he had had enough and they were banishing his son. He ordered the servants to take Nana Hikari to the Tamon forest. The servants grabbed his arms and began to lead him out. Nana Hikari screamed at them to wait and not to do this. At night, he found himself alone in the forest. He was surrounded by monsters and was very afraid. He asked what this was necessary and drove them away from himself. He began to think that it was all because of Deret, whom he envied, so he decided to challenge him to a duel. Kneeling in the dark forest, Nana Hikari thought about why he hadn't just been more honest. Meanwhile, the protagonist, the commander, and Konfi were standing outside the house. Militara said that this duel was at a decent level, like an experienced soldier. Konfi thanked her and said that he won thanks to both of them. The protagonist replied that he simply made the sword. He had a hand in the victory. At that moment, his friends called out to Konfi. He thanked the commander and the protagonist, and then happily ran to his friends. They happily congratulated him. Militara said that this day marked the beginning of his brilliant career. The protagonist agreed. They came to the square, and Militari announced that from this day on, Mr. Deret would be the new blacksmith of their valiant army. Everyone happily shouted, "Old man!" The protagonist stood there and thought about not being called an old man. Meanwhile, in the Grossa kingdom, Senji was walking in the palace dungeon and heard Sinon screaming. He was asking to be released, saying that he was being held like a monkey, and they wouldn't get away with it. He then accused them of not responding to his shouts. The guards approached. One of them asked what he was talking about. The second told him to sit still. Senji felt ashamed of him when he approached them. He thanked the guards for their work. Then he opened the prison where Sinon was sitting and said, "Come out." Meanwhile, the entire army gathered, waiting for Deret's turn. One of the soldiers noted that after the repairs, it became easier for him to wield the sword. Another asked for his sword to be adjusted, and a third noted the problems with the shoulder guard. Deret, covered in sweat, asked for a little wait, promising to see everyone in order of turn. Deret decided to rest and sat on a chair, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He was surrounded by people who admired his work and were very grateful to him. At this time, 3 warriors looked at the sword hanging in a frame on the wall and discussed the beauty of it. One of them said that he would become the owner of the sword Kamina. Another said that he would surpass him, and the third assured that he would not lose either. Konfai expressed confidence that he would become the true owner of this sword. They began to read the inscription on the frame, which said that in order to obtain Kamina, one must perform an S-rank feat. Konfai suggested, for example as a commander, to defeat one of the 4 demon kings. The protagonist, sitting in bewilderment, asked if Militara really defeated the demon king. He was told that she was amazing, and he agreed that she was a true hero. He liked to see how the sword he created performed feats. The guys stood and watched the protagonist, talking among themselves. One of them noted that Kamina was made by Deret, and he was also amazing. The second one wanted to be a cool old man like Deret. Deret heard all this and thought that they still called him an old man. Then he turned to them and said that he was done with work for today. Walking to the exit, he opened the door and said to come tomorrow. Militara was walking towards him, and everyone greeted her. When she came, she said that his work was simply magnificent. He replied that there was more work than in writing, but now he was satisfied. She was happy to hear that. Thanks to him, the soldiers had also changed and everyone wanted to use Kamina. The guys decided to take their training seriously. The protagonist said that this was the best praise for a blacksmith. Militara lowered her head and apologized for the fact that the queen limited his capabilities. He raised his hand to his chin and asked if this meant that he should now perform conjugations and repairs in moderation. She confirmed his assumptions. The protagonist replied that it was not scary. He understood that it was wrong for a weapon like the Kamina to be everywhere and with everyone. The army commander was glad that he understood her. She stood, looked at him and smiled. She also said that she had come for an important conversation. Her Majesty wanted to meet him and said that they had to go to the palace. The protagonist stood in bewilderment and did not understand what it was for. He asked if it was now. She answered that it was. Thanks to his contribution, the overall motivation of their soldiers was raised. The protagonist thought that the queen wanted to see a commoner. What should he do? The protagonist asked, "What is a queen like?" In a nutshell. Militara thought about how to describe her. The kingdom of Gloss was ruled by Serenade Gloss, a strict queen. When Senji and Sinon appeared before her, they knelt down and Senji began his report. He reported that Amatsurugi, the greatest sword of their country, was broken. At this time, Sinon, without taking his eyes off the queen, said, "She is beautiful." Senji, lowering his head, continued to say that Sinon deceived him. He did not realize his incompetence and is now ready to accept responsibility for his mistakes. The queen admitted that Senji did make a mistake and he is ready to accept punishment. Then she took the whip and hit him with all her strength, saying that she does not tolerate incompetence. He agreed, and she hit him again. Sinon, confused, asked what was going on. The queen replied that it was his turn and hit him with all her strength. She called him trash, the guildmaster who broke their country's treasure, and told him to think about his incompetence. Sinon, pressing his head to the floor and covering it with his hands, said that it hurt. He asked why she was doing this to him, and the queen replied that he would no longer be working as a guildmaster. Soon after, Militara and Deret arrived at the palace. She said to him, "Master, let's go." They came to the large doors and she asked again, "Is he ready?" To which MC replied that he would need at least a year to prepare. She smiled and said that it was a good joke and everything would be fine. The queen is kind to those who are competent. The doors opened and they entered the hall. Approaching the queen, they bowed before her and she said that she was glad to see them. Militara thanked her and said that she had brought Mr. Deret. The protagonist said that Deret was him. The queen replied that he was a great blacksmith who had created Kamen and the Shinma, and acknowledged him as the best blacksmith in the country. Deret, kneeling, pressed his hand to his heart, and said that it was an honor for him. He was very happy about this. The queen continued and said that he had to deal with Nana Hikari himself, as she had other things to do, and she apologized for that. Her gaze was clouded, but the protagonist replied that her eyes were not clouded, they were beautiful as precious stones. The queen laughed slightly and said that he was not only a good blacksmith but also a ladies' man. Today she had called him on an important matter. A matsurugi was broken, and she asked if he had forgotten about the sword. A glass table was brought to him, in which the sword was lying. He was told that this was a matsurugi. The protagonist looked at the sword in surprise and asked for forgiveness. He thought that this was the first time he saw such a beautiful sword. The queen told him that a noble admired it every day, and one day the sword evolved. In the end, he decided to donate it to the state. The protagonist put his hand to his chin and began to think that another evolution to S rank. How can he repair a sword that he does not remember? The protagonist expressed his regret for not remembering this sword and asked for forgiveness. In response, the queen asked, did he really create such a beautiful sword without even realizing it? She laughed and noted what an interesting man he was. The protagonist, after thinking about it, was surprised. What kind of noble would constantly admire a sword? Then the queen continued and said that she wanted to ask him for help in repairing a matsurugi. The protagonist asked, repair? If you look closely. But before he could finish, the queen interrupted him and said that there was one more thing. She opened the door and Sinon fell out. He fell on the floor and the protagonist asked, Sinon? Sinon looked at him in confusion. The queen explained that this man was the one who broke the sword and asked the protagonist to take him as her apprentice. Sinon looked at the protagonist with anger, then stood up and told the queen to wait, since he couldn't learn from the useless trash Deret. In response, the queen stood up from her throne and yelled at him that he was the useless trash and hit him with all her strength. Then she told him to listen to an intelligent person. The protagonist, angry, thought that this was unfair. The queen continued and said that one of her subordinates, Senji, would be keeping an eye on Sinon. He promised that he wouldn't let Sinon cause trouble for the protagonist and told him not to worry. The protagonist, crossing his arms in front of his chest, thought that he couldn't refuse the queen. He put his hand on his heart and said, smiling, whatever she wishes. As they left the hall, the queen said after them that she was looking forward to his success. After leaving the hall, they stood in bewilderment. The protagonist began to stretch and said that he was nervous, suggesting that they return to the inn. Senji asked where Deret was staying, and the protagonist replied that he was staying at the inn in the Eastern District. Senji then offered him to stay at the National Guard dormitory, but the protagonist refused, since he was staying at a good inn. Then the queen's servant asked him to accompany him. They arrived at the Eastern District and approached the house. The protagonist said that this was his inn. He opened the door and turned to Del, saying that he was back. She replied, welcome back, adding that he returned late, and she was already starting to worry. At that moment, Militara, furious, entered the inn and said that from today on, she would also be staying here. The protagonist stood there, deep in thought, looking at her with confusion. Del said that she would prepare the room right away, and then asked the protagonist whether he preferred a bath or dinner first. He replied that since Militare was already here, dinner first. Del nodded in understanding. At that moment, Sinon burst into the inn and, not hiding his anger, asked why only Deret was being pampered here. He also wanted to stay here. But then the queen's servant intervened, saying that no one would let him live here, and kicked Sinon right in the side. Del apologized and said that they had no more rooms available, only the stables were left. Sinon, indignant, exclaimed, the stables? The queen's servant grabbed him by the ear, said that it was time for them to leave, and led him out of the inn. Sinon did not stop asking, are they laughing at him? He's the guild master. The queen's servant shouted back that he was the former guild master. Everyone looked at this scene in bewilderment. Del asked the protagonist to wait a bit, and he agreed. Militara then asked him, what plans does he have for tomorrow evening? The protagonist, surprised, turned to her and replied that he had no plans for tomorrow evening and asked, what? She had said that they would spend the evening together. The next day they arrived at the smithy, where 3 people were already waiting for them. One of them asked the protagonist, is this him, Mr. Dret? He has heard of him. He extended his hand, saying that he was glad to meet him. It was the former blacksmith who told him that Nana Hikari had fired them, and now they were happy to return. He greeted Militara. The former blacksmith continued to say that there were other people like Nana Hikari who were capable of destroying national treasures. Isn't that dangerous? He was lucky that their queen had shown mercy. At this time, Sinon and Senji approached. Senji turned to the protagonist and said that it was time to start repairing a Matsurugi. The former blacksmith put a bag on the floor and asked the protagonist to use these materials. There were steel ore, a magic strengthening stone, a larval stone, and an aqua stone. He said that he hid these materials from Nana Hikari and it would be better for the protagonist to use them than Nana Hikari. In addition, if he repaired a Matsurugi, it would be a great honor. The protagonist said that these were good materials and he could use them. The former blacksmith once again turned to Deret and asked, "Would you mind if he watched him work?" His friends also asked if they could watch. The protagonist replied, "Of course." The protagonist took the sword, put it on the table, and began to look at the sword. He thought how beautiful it was, and that he was a good man. But will he be able to surpass his past self? Everyone stood and watched him, pleased that they could see the work of such a great craftsman. The protagonist put on his gloves and began to work. The sound of metal clashing came from the forge. After a while, he finished repairing the sword. The Amatsurugi Kai was restored. Everyone was amazed by his work, admitting that he was a genius blacksmith. The former blacksmith asked the MC how he imbued this sword with a holy element. The second asked, "Is it because he hit the hammer diagonally?" The third asked him to teach her blacksmithing. The protagonist stood in shock and could not say anything. After a while, the army commander approached the protagonist and proudly said that he was very popular. The protagonist asked her not to exaggerate. At that moment, Sinon, overcome with rage, burst into the workshop and headed towards Deret. The protagonist tried to explain to him that they needed to work on their hammer technique first, but Sinon replied that he didn't need orders. Senji couldn't take it anymore and hit him hard in the face, telling him not to act so arrogantly. Sinon started bleeding and fell to the floor. After a while, Sinon sat down at the table, and the protagonist suggested that he try hitting a sheet of metal, but asked him to be careful not to hurt his finger. Sinon snatched the hammer from the protagonist's hands, swung it with all his might, and hit his finger. Everyone watched the scene in horror, and Sinon ran around the workshop, screaming in pain. The protagonist approached him and asked if he was okay, but Sinon told him not to come closer. He didn't need his pity. The queen's servant immediately came and took the hammer from him, telling him not to swing it like that. Everyone around started laughing at Sinon, and the protagonist thought that it would be very difficult. At the bar, it was time to celebrate the promotion of the protagonist. Everyone raised their glasses and someone shouted, "Bottoms up!" Militara noticed Del and Confai standing there dissatisfied, then asked, "Why are they sitting here?" The protagonist replied that he invited them. "There are also blacksmiths and soldiers here." Then she took a glass and started drinking. Confai jumped up from the table and shouted at her not to drink it in one gulp. Militara told him not to irritate her. Confai said, "Speaking of alcohol, here." He looked at Militara, who picked up a doll with the protagonist's face and started playing with it like it was a toy plane. Confai said that Militara's fun had begun. Everyone turned their attention to her, and one of them asked, "Is there one more doll?" The second said, "Really?" And the third sat, watched and admired, saying that she had made a new one. "Now she will play like this until she goes to sleep, just leave her." The protagonist replied that he understood. Somehow, the picture of a serious commander ceased to exist in his head. Del turned to the protagonist and said that she heard from Confai that he participated in a duel of blacksmiths. She thanked him for the beautiful weapon he made for Confai. The protagonist replied that he was just doing his job. She told him not to be modest because thanks to him, Confai was able to defeat a man with great strength. MC said that it was all thanks to Confai's training. Then Confai himself approached the protagonist and asked if he would make a weapon for himself. The protagonist asked in surprise, "A weapon?" "He is not an adventurer." Confai said, "Why not?" Militara was sitting drunk at the table, overheard their conversation. Holding a doll with a fork in one hand, she said that if he uses his weapon, everyone around him will be able to clearly see its qualities. The protagonist fell silent, put his hand to his chin and, turning his attention to the dolls, thought that this was a good idea. His own weapon. The next day, Militara, addressing all the soldiers, announced that the main character would be creating weapon for himself. This decision was made for his own protection. The protagonist noted that owning a weapon would allow him to master blacksmithing more deeply. Everyone was delighted with this idea and expressed a desire to quickly see the weapon created by the protagonist. The soldiers happily offered to teach him how to use a weapon, and he gratefully accepted their offer. However, unexpectedly, Sinon, unable to bear it, exclaimed, "Wait!" He was outraged that he was forgotten and claimed that he also needed a weapon. But before he could continue, the queen's servant grabbed him by the ear and sat him down at the table, saying, "Shut up, idiot, and learn to use a hammer." Meanwhile, the protagonist and the army commander arrived at the Gloss Army warehouse, where Deret began looking for materials to create weapons. After picking up a few materials, he noted that this would do, then moved on to the next box and repeated his choice. Finally, he picked another material and declared that it was just fine. Militara, surprised by his choice, asked why he didn't use A-rank materials. She was sure that no one would object to it. However, Deret replied that low-rank materials were enough for him, and that good materials were best left for the soldiers. Militara, unable to hide her surprise, bowed to him, shed a tear, and said that he was a fine man. In response, he only smiled and said that she was exaggerating, and that it was time for them to go. When they arrived at the forge, soldiers crowded around them, asking what he would create, an axe or a magic staff. The protagonist replied that he had many ideas and was offered to create a sword. Militara offered to teach the protagonist how to wield a sword, but he sighed and doubted whether he could handle it well. He said that he would rather create another weapon. The army commander asked in surprise, "What exactly?" To which the protagonist replied, "A hammer," and everyone was completely perplexed. The protagonist picked up a hammer and said that blacksmiths often use this in their work, so he would feel confident with it. If he was used to swinging a hammer, then it would be easier to use it as a weapon. Everyone looked at him happily and said, "I see." As expected from such a master. Soon the protagonist finished his work and announced that everything was ready. In his hands was a huge hammer, which everyone perceived with surprise and admiration. All that was left was to come up with a name for it. Militara happily approached the protagonist and said that she had a great idea. Everyone was surprised and said that it was great, because she would definitely find a suitable name. She suggested calling the hammer Deret. The protagonist stood in bewilderment and thought that this was not a very good name. But everyone said that it was cool, laconic, and understandable. Even the shape of the hammer itself resembled the name Deret. Everyone approached the protagonist and looked at him with happy eyes. He agreed, "Let the hammer have this name. The main thing is that everyone is happy." The Deret hammer, rank S, holy element. If you put magical power into a blow with this hammer, then in power it will be equal to the fall of a meteorite. A few days later, the protagonist was training alone in the second training zone, honing his weapon control skills.